want to make sure we've got sound going out to people in the audience, here in studio and watching remotely. Welcome to the Winter 2022 Katz Distinguished Lecture with Catherine Cole. I'm Caitlin Palo, the Program and Events Manager for the Simpson Center for the Humanities. This is our very first hybrid Katz Distinguished Lecture, so thank you for joining us in this experiment. It is wonderful to have you joining us from wherever you are joining. In just a moment, Professor Dianne Harris, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Washington, will introduce our speaker. Professor Catherine Cole will then speak for about 45 minutes. Following her lecture, there will be a very short break for us to set up Q&A. At that time, everyone viewing, both in studio or viewing remotely, will be able to submit a question. Those of you viewing remotely are invited to ask questions via the link that will be provided on screen during the short break. For those of you who are in studio, you are welcome to use the same link, which we will share on the screen here, or you are welcome to use the cards that were placed on the chairs, and we have a few extras as well. If you use the cards, there will be people to gather them in the aisle, and we'll be handing them through the web to me to pose the questions to Catherine Cole. This lecture is being recorded and will be posted to the Simpson Center's YouTube channel later this quarter. The Q&A, however, will not be recorded, though it will be broadcast, so stick around for that conversation. Without further ado, join me in welcoming Dean Dianne Harris.
Good evening. Can you hear me all right? Great. I'm Dianne Harris, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this evening as we listen to this year's Katz Distinguished Lecturer, Catherine Cole, the University of Washington's Divisional Dean of the Arts and a professor of dance and English. Before I proceed further, I'd like to acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. The Katz Lectures constitute the University of Washington's highest public tribute to groundbreaking work in the humanities. Solomon Katz was an admired and beloved scholar and leader of this university. The Katz Lectures remind us of his commitments to higher education in the humanities, and they provide us with an opportunity to restore our own such commitments as we listen to outstanding scholars presenting leading-edge research that helps us understand our complex lives and work anew. I want to thank Kathy Woodward for her extraordinary leadership of the Simpson Center, who's bringing us this event tonight, and their outstanding staff, Caitlin Palo and C.K. Grimmer, for all they do to bring events like this one to fruition. I also wish to thank Professor Lynn Thomas for nominating tonight's speaker. Becoming acquainted with Dr. Catherine Cole has been one of the highlights of my entree to the University of Washington. An indefatigable and energizing presence, Catherine is an outstanding leader whose clarity, integrity, focus, creativity, and acumen make her a rare and treasured administrator. As a scholar, she has distinguished herself across multiple fields, including dance and performance studies, African studies, and disability studies. She's an internationally renowned scholar who has produced 3 monographs, a co-edited volume, and dozens of scholarly articles. But she has also, and this is exceptionally rare in my experience, led and performed several artistic and dance productions that have focused on questions of mobility and new forms of ability. She is a scholar, and she is an artist. I do want to mention the titles of her award-winning books so you can readily find them. Performance and the Afterlives of Injustice from 2020, Performing South Africa's Truth Commission from 2010, and Ghana's Concert Party Theater from 2001. That she has so consistently produced outstanding and impactful scholarship and performances while serving as first a chair of the Department of Theater, Dance, and Dean of Theater, Dance, and Performance Studies at UC Berkeley, and then over the past 6 years here as Divisional Dean of Arts, and has been recognized for her outstanding teaching, is a testament to her passion for the work and, I suspect, her compelling and correct sense of its necessity. It's no surprise that she's been honored with fellowships and awards from the National Endowment for the Humanities, from the Freie Universität Berlin, and the Fund for U.S. Artists, among others. As her nominator, Professor Lynn Thomas, noted, Kathryn possesses a sparky intellect, infectious curiosity, and creative flair. I couldn't agree more. I'm thrilled to be here tonight with all of you to listen to her lecture titled Performance and the Afterlives of Injustice in South Africa. Kathryn.
Thank you so much, Dean Harris, for that generous introduction. Thank you also to the Simpson Center for the Humanities and the staff of Kane Hall and UW Video for the support tonight, and for our real-time captioner who is making this talk accessible to more people. As an uninvited guest in America's Pacific Northwest, I acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples who have resided on and cared for this land and its water since time immemorial. As a disabled white American woman who studies African culture, I am humbled by the extraordinary vision, creativity, courage of the artists from South Africa, Ghana, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, whose work I've had the privilege to witness and write about these past 30 years. I salute you. Where my analysis falls short, and surely it will, I hope my words stimulate greater awareness of and interest in your art, so that more scholars write about your work in future and get more things right. South Africa has undergone a dramatic change in my lifetime, from one of the most notoriously racist and authoritarian regimes in the world to a non-racial democracy with a constitution said to be one of the most progressive in the world. Let us recall key milestones on South Africa's quest for liberation. The freeing of Nelson Mandela in 1990 after 27 years of incarceration as a political prisoner. The first democratic elections in 1994, during which the black majority, who had never before been enfranchised, came forth and stood for hours to cast their votes. And the work of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or TRC, in the mid-1990s as it sought to facilitate transparency and a reckoning with the past through transitional justice. The TRC provided a chance for victims of apartheid to tell their stories, for their losses and suffering to be formally and publicly acknowledged in a national forum, and an opportunity for perpetrators of gross violations of human rights to give full disclosure of their deeds and potentially to receive amnesty. The world watched and the world marveled at what was often called the South African miracle. Well, here we are in the year 2022, nearly 3 decades after those first euphoric elections. How are things going today? South Africa's transition promised change. That is a shift from here of apartheid to a there. Imagined as someplace better, a place not racialized, a land of reconciliation, a nation with greater economic equality and opportunity, and a place of peace and without state-perpetrated violence. But the post-apartheid era delivered not revolution, but transformation. A vague and nebulous, even corporate concept that, according to many critics, divested revolution of radicalism. Colin Bundy offers a concise explanation for how this happened. The negotiated settlement combined significant restructuring of the political sphere and broad continuity of the economic sphere. Artist Jay Pother, who I will talk about tonight, has observed, quote, "The holders of South Africa's wealth and land remain largely unchanged since apartheid. There is an alarming disparity between the wealthiest and the poorest sectors of the population, and the number of people living on the poverty line has barely changed since apartheid." Choreographer Mamela Nyamza, who I will also be speaking about, has said of her country's present that now is too soon to say that everything is fine. No, we're not free yet. My book is called Performance and the Afterlives of Injustice. This title reflects an exhaustion with terms like post-colonial and post-apartheid. The post is never accurate. These terms also presume a linear understanding of time and change, as they seem to imply a progression from one state to another. Many of the artists I examine in this book also express profound frustration with these progress narratives about South Africa. As I sought a conceptual frame for this book that could hold the range of questions, themes, and preoccupations that are central to the artists under review, I was influenced by several scholars. I am especially indebted to African-American scholar Saidiya Hartman for her phrase, "the afterlives of slavery." Beginning with her book, Lose Your Mother, a memoir about her diasporic travels to Ghana to trace slave routes and histories, Hartman illuminates how even though slavery has formally ended in the United States, its afterlives permeate our country's present with disruptive, truncating, caustic, and distorting legacies. Among African Americans, the afterlife of slavery is evident today, in her words, through, quote, skewed life chances, limited access to health and education, premature death, incarceration, and impoverishment. For South African artists featured in my book, past injustices in their country are multiple. Slavery, yes, but also more recently colonization and apartheid, both of which endure in neoliberal economies of extraction and exploitation in the contemporary world. None of these histories are over yet, but these artists presume it is not too late to imagine otherwise. Whether the afterlives of injustice are acknowledged or denied, whether they serve as a backdrop or a catalyst for dramatic action, the continued vitality of unresolved wrongs creates volatile, dynamic conditions. For artists working in such contexts, the afterlives of injustice are forces to be reckoned with. And that is precisely what their art does. Three metaphors have dominated the post-apartheid years. One is the idea of a journey, which was often promoted in slogans that accompanied the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This banner here says, "Truth, the road to reconciliation." Critics at the time, such as cartoonist Zapiro, noted that the hoped-for destination was far from assured. A second common metaphor was that of cure, an assumption that the TRC was pivotal to opening old wounds, a necessary treatment to promote racial healing, and we see Desmond Tutu here as the physician. And finally, the third metaphor is the Rainbow Nation, a concept first promoted by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, may he rest in peace, and also widely promoted by South Africa's first president, Nelson Mandela. Tonight, I will focus on two artists, Jay Pother and Mamela Nyamza, whose works engage and critique these three metaphors, the journey, the cure, and the rainbow. Both artists show how histories of violence and racialized oppression are embedded in the fabric of everyday life, even in the most intimate realms of the body, memory, dreams, and interpersonal relationships. We see this in the ways certain bodies move, in the nuances of gait, in the authority or uncertainty with which certain bodies occupy space, in the habits of muscle memory, and even on a cellular level in the tissues of the flesh. Their performances expose what lies within, unseen but deeply felt, what is tightly held in muscles, even when toxic. We also see in their performances habits of the old apartheid order shaking loose, unearthing certain freedoms that exist in the now, but have been latent, buried, or too entangled with toxic remains to yet achieve their promise. As with the US queer performance of a color who Jose Esteban Munoz analyzed in his influential work, Disidentifications, the contemporary South African performing artists of color featured in my book are dreaming, striving, and agitating for disorders of the real. They are wedging open spaces in the country's stalled and even false transition. In these spaces, they project new and necessary visions. The hope for a better future remains a vibrant expectation and a demand, certainly by the artists featured here, but theirs is a quest that requires the ability to dwell in complexity, to endure a lack of resolution, to consider the heterogeneity of cultures without forcing a false oneness, and to inhabit a place where the afterlives of injustice are likely to endure. Let us begin with an image, a situation, a scene without words, a surreal embodied apparition that might be a dream, not because the image is aspirational, but rather because it taps a nerve, puts into tangible and material form deeply held impulses that are otherwise inchoate and abstract. In Jay Pother's 2005 site-specific performance, The Beautiful Ones Must Be Born, a black male performer wearing a pinstripe suit walks on a treadmill in a courtyard where, decades before, anti-apartheid political prisoners had been allowed to exercise during their incarceration. Pother's site-specific work was staged at South Africa's Constitutional Court in Johannesburg, which was formerly apartheid's notorious Old Fort prison. The man is flanked by two white ballet dancers in tutus who wield garden forks and poke at tufts of artificial green grass, a feeble attempt to groom a false lawn that itself is a feeble attempt to cover the courtyard's cracked floor. The new has not yet taken root, because it can't. Projections on a screen above and behind the man show images of urban squalor in informal settlements, the shanty towns that still populate so much of post-apartheid South Africa. Another performer, dressed in Indian clothing and nonchalantly sipping a Diet Coke, pushes buttons on the treadmill, accelerating the suited man's pace. As his pace quickens, independent of his will or agency, the tempo of the video above him slows down, isolating specific details of poverty and neglect. The man runs at maximum speed on the spot, fleeing a horizon in sight, says Jay Pother. This work pivots on a paradox, frantic motion that is at the same time stagnation. This scene, called motion sickness, typifies Jay Pother's penchant for evocative imagery and unexpected juxtapositions. His performances often string together several scenes, tableaux vivants of the unconscious, uncanny living pictures without words that encapsulate the ironies of the present while also disrupting and unleashing their power. Motion sickness both reflects and foretells. The location evokes a rich history, the heroism of anti-apartheid political prisoners and South Africa's so-called miraculous transition. This former prison had once held defiant activists Nelson Mandela and Gandhi, and today it has been reclaimed and repurposed as South Africa's constitutional court. The renovated prison and adjacent new structures were designed to create, quote, an iconic building, celebrated for its daring and its combination of dignity and accessibility, its warmth, and its embodiment of the hopes of a young country. But the contemporary scene Pother stages on this site is not one of hope. One black man races in place while sharing the stage with various atomized others who enjoy a leisure that this man does not have. He is the quintessence of a man striving for upward social mobility. He wears the pinstripe suit and uses a treadmill to stay in shape, for his life, unlike that of so many blacks in South Africa today, does not demand manual labor. Yet he seems desperate. He is all sweat and exertion, but he doesn't get anywhere, especially in terms of addressing the poverty that hovers over him, haunting and pursuing. This man doesn't move forward, and the faster he races, the more the poverty above him comes into concentrated, sharp focus. This evocative scene was one among 6 staged in Pother's work, The Beautiful Ones Must Be Born. As often happens in his works, the performance required spectators to move locations as they tracked the evolving scenes mounted throughout the site, from the Great African Steps and the Mandela Courtyard to the Constitution Square and the Tower. Audiences witnessed multiple tableaus, each an amalgamation of dance, video art, movement, music, and spoken text. Each was created by Pother's company, Siwela Sonke Dance Theater, in collaboration with Katak Kendra from KwaZulu-Natal, Moving Into Dance Mapatong from Johannesburg, and graduates of the South African Ballet Theater. Intertexts for the work were multiple and wide-ranging. Zulu praise poetry and the story of Shaka Zulu, India's Mahabharata, and the Greek tragedy, the Oresteia. Movement vocabularies included Shembe dance, ballet, Indian Bharatanatyam, and San and Khoisan dance. The work's title references a Ghanaian novel by Ayikwe Arma, The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born, a now paradigmatic novel of post-colonial disillusionment written in 1968. Arma's story transpires on the eve of Ghana's first coup and depicts a world of intransigent poverty and corruption in which there is little reason to expect genuine change with the overthrow of Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah. Arma's novel is darkly pessimistic, but has a cautious hint of optimism. The novel's title comes from its final scene, in which the narrator describes a slogan he sees on the back of an overloaded lorry going about its usual business in the fragile days after the coup: "The beautiful ones are not yet born." In his allusion to Arma's novel, Pother asserts a new imperative: the beautiful ones must be born. A dynamic between a disappointing present, the beautiful is not now, and a desired future, a beautiful that must be, animates Pother's creative expressions, and indeed many of the works featured in my book. Since the 1980s, J. Pother has been making dance theater and performance works of astonishing magnitude and range, while also serving as the curator and producer of several vanguard festivals in Cape Town and Amsterdam. Arguably, his most ambitious and complex performance is called Body of Evidence. Like an ultrasonic rendering of what normally goes unseen, Body of Evidence is an invasive work. If South Africans should rediscover the ordinary, as one scholar exhorted during the early post-apartheid years, Body of Evidence suggests that this rediscovery should probe beneath the skin and on the other side of human consciousness. It is an intimate and jarring journey, unearthing memories embedded in bone and flesh, muscle memory, synapses, and scar tissue. The work surfaces doubts that the country's transition, its rainbow promises, and hopes that truth-telling could somehow heal the wounds of the past. Body of Evidence reveals the underneath of things, providing glimpses of how the past and its traumas remain embedded not only in scar tissue and bones, but also in recurrent dreams, specters, apparitions, and tightly held muscle memories. Exposed in cold, harsh light, the scenography features video projections on the back wall and stage floor, images based on Gray's Anatomy, Henry Gray's 1918 ink drawings of brains, inner ears, muscles, ligaments, spines, vertebrae, pelvises, and feet bones. Gray's drawings are idealizations rather than faithful renderings of flesh and bone, but the gulf between idealization and actualization is part of the point. The ideal is not the real. Rights written into South Africa's constitution are not necessarily rights honored in daily life. The post-apartheid multiracial dream has proven to be a mirage. While the medicalized frame of Body of Evidence suggests scientific positivism or forensic criminal inquiry, both of which presume the truth can be known, what actually appears on stage are revelations that thwart and defy comprehension, even as they present images of arresting strangeness that burrow deep into the spectator's psyche, seeding dreamscapes that remain vivid long after the show has ended. References to forensic autopsy and radiological diagnosis reveal our protagonist as the sum of his past, a past that is very much alive in the here and now, asserting itself within and on the body and in his psyche. The past in the now erupts, disrupts, and thwarts any sense of calm or equanimity, although none of this may be apparent to the casual observer in daily life. The reality under the surface that is exposed is not necessarily an alarming pathology, like a tumor or something to be cured, like a disease, nor is this a body of evidence that seems focused on making a finding or proving anything or discovering who is to blame. This evidence is rather presented as a revelation, a cause for rumination. It lacks a structuring narrative. To be sure, there are gestures toward confession, rituals of atonement, and attempted rapprochement between long feuding duos, including a figure that is a clear allusion to a particular apartheid-era state torturer who famously washed the feet of those he had previously persecuted. There are also otherworldly apparitions that seem to be attempting a ritual of healing or cleansing. But these all seem largely ineffectual and irrelevant. More unresolved detritus grist for the dream mill and memory machine. Disillusion with the TRC and with the so-called post-apartheid transition provoked Pother to create Body of Evidence. He saw the work as a way to shift temporal frames, to stop seeing the past as past. The afterlives of apartheid are as cellular and enduring as they are overwhelming and loud, a cacophony of confusing, inscrutable, dreamlike apparitions that resonate as deeply familiar, but also defiantly strange. The characters on stage exist in the protracted interval between a dream state and unconsciousness, between terror and hilarity, between paralysis and exuberant movement, between a dystopian past that perpetually haunts and a utopian future that is perpetually deferred. In their multiplicity, the many dancers represent a fragmentation of a single self. When our protagonist arises in solitude at the show's end, his body appears very much intact and healthy, even virile. We are forced to reconcile his hale external visage with the sprawl of haunting phantasms that have populated the stage during the previous hour and 20 minutes. This confusion is what lies within him. Yet if the show's last image was our first impression of this man, who would suspect that such turbulence lies within? South Africa's state transition created inflated expectations of cure. Pother's Body of Evidence illuminates the fact that neither a medical model, as symbolized by those drawings from Gray's Anatomy, nor a moral model of dealing with the apartheid past, as promoted by the TRC, are adequate. The afterlives of apartheid's injustice continue to fundamentally transform individuals' bodies, minds, and social formations, and this will persist. As with temporal frames of before and after, as with the proliferation of posts in South Africa, post-apartheid, post-anti-apartheid, post-transition, as with progress narratives provided by South Africa's TRC about truth, the road to reconciliation, there is an underlying utopian promise in the notion of cure that a condition can be permanently fixed or repaired. The ideology of cure has, as disability studies scholar Rosemary Garland Thompson argues, quote, an aggressive intent to fix, regulate, or eradicate what is seen as deviant. She calls this a pervasive will to normalize. I argue in the book that disability studies provides a valuable framework for understanding the lived experience of South African transition. Just as the medical model promotes and sustains an essential separation between the non-disabled and the disabled, the discourse of transitional justice promotes and sustains a fundamental separation between an authoritarian past and a presumed liberated, democratic, and healed future state. What Body of Evidence does not offer is any notion of a cure. If it is pathology we are witnessing, this pathology is presented as a condition that just is. It demands that we witness. It demands to be acknowledged. It may require not a cure, but rather a quiet and insistent commitment to stay in one place and to dig deeply, excavating the hidden, the unseen, and the misunderstood. Some have said that despite the TRC's many disappointments and failures, it succeeded in narrowing the range of permissible lies. We might think of Pother's dance theater as a kind of analogous performative. These dances expand the range of accessible dreams. Not all of them are pleasing. Not all of them are easily understood. Our dreams belong to us, but given our general lack of control over them, we might say rather that we belong to our dreams. While Jay Pother's work deconstructs the metaphor of truth as a road to reconciliation or the TRC as a cure for apartheid's ills, artist Mamela Nyamza reconsiders the limits of the rainbow. Nyamza is a prolific artist working on the edge between dance and theater, between performance and installation, between dance and undance, between adversarial confrontation and captivating self-discovery. Born in 1976, the year of the Soweto uprisings, to a large family in the Guguletu township of Cape Town, Nyamza began training in ballet as a young girl when family members identified and encouraged her extraordinary gifts as a dancer. Ballet as a form has a charged relationship with white supremacy, and Mamela both lived these issues and totally broke them apart. She went on to become one of the few Black ballet dancers during apartheid, and she then went on to New York to train with the Alvin Ailey Company. While in New York, Nyamza began to explore her sexuality, and she experienced a same-sex relationship for the first time. But living in New York was hard for her. It was a lonely place, a long way from her home. She returned to South Africa a year later, and soon thereafter traumatically lost her mother, who was brutally raped and murdered. In the wake of this tragedy, young relatives needed care, and Nyamza soon found herself locked in domestic duties. This was compounded when she became unexpectedly pregnant by an old boyfriend. With the impending expectations of motherhood and mounting family obligations, Nyamza's career as a performer seemed to hang in the balance. But out of this time of uncertainty, grief, loss, and what seemed to be a narrowing of possibilities, Mamela Nyamza's signature work, Hatched, was born. This autobiographical work expressed personal discoveries and transformation as Nyamza came out as a gay woman and as a lesbian mother, divorced her husband, and proclaimed herself to be an independent performance artist, one with ballet training, yes, but one also set on imploding that training and making something altogether new with the remains. In subsequent works, such as this is also an image from Hatched. In subsequent works, such as The Last Attitude and The Meal, she expressed an autobiographical process of transformation. These works deconstructed colonizing practices, such as the white supremacy embedded in ballet's policing of big bums, big bottoms, and the imposition of tight hair buns for straight white hair, and the rigid domestic expectations also of patriarchal heterosexual African motherhood. She defiantly, boldly, creatively, ferociously claimed her own novel and independent pathway. I will spend the remainder of my time in this lecture focusing on her work called De-Apart Hate. We begin in church, the small University of Witwatersrand amphitheater transformed into a house of charismatic worship. As audience members enter the theater, an audio recording of choral worship from a small Presbyterian church somewhere in South Africa blares over the sound system, rocking the house. The room pulsates with an underlying rhythm that is marked out by handbells and a low bass thumping that we eventually learn, when one performer planted in the audience contributes live accompaniment, comes from the slapping of a leather pillow. 1, 2, and then an unstressed third beat. 1, 2, 1, 2, a racing and rollicking asymmetrical three-part heartbeat. Individual voices in the chorus soar above others at various moments, creating a musical texture of loose-knit synchronicity that fully inhabits the offbeat, punctuated by occasional shouts of hallelujah and a few harmonic progressions and rhythmic shifts. Otherwise, this opening soundtrack is a continuous, mesmerizing loop, a groove, a vamp of incantation. Audience members looking for empty seats step around and past a woman dancing in the main aisle, Mamela Nyamza, dressed formally in a black sleeveless sheath that wraps like a tight leather book cover around her slender, athletic body. Her toned hourglass torso undulates to the music while her elbows jut out rhythmically and her wrists remain firmly held at her hips. The beat seems to well up from within her. 1, 2, 1, 2. Nyamza's head is shaven, save for the tightly cropped patch on top of her head. Her loosely held arms, bare and muscular, swing in time to the music, elbows fluttering out from a swaying torso. The confining tightness of the black dress gives way just below the knees to white tulle, which flares outward from the knees like a mermaid's tail. At one point, Nyamza's knees, tightly bound together by the dress, bend in time to the music, almost as if she is stooping to kneel. At the same time, her torso rhythmically drops forward along a horizontal plane. Legs and torso form interlocking but contrasting undulations, moving both horizontally and laterally. Nyamza seems to be singing along to the music, her face concentrated and radiant with an expression of intense ecstasy and joy. Sometimes she extends a single arm upward and outward in a forceful punctuation of an emotional musical crescendo, a slight shift in the tempo of the music, or a slight modulation in the melody prompts her to lift her right arm above her head and bring it down at the elbow as if pulling on a rope. The congregation, which is what the audience has become, is submerged in a sea of sound without any clear destination or shore. Nyamza then leans over the thrust stage and begins banging on it like a drum. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Amplifying the beat, held steady by the clanging bells and thumping leather pillows. Spectators still streaming into the theater walk past Nyamza, sometimes swaying to the music, sometimes looking at their cell phones, or furtively trying to find an empty seat, alarmed that the performance seems to have already begun. At one point in one performance, the celebrated South African choreographer Robin Orlin entered the theater as a spectator, and Nyamza rose for a quick embrace and an air kiss, signaling that the boundaries between performer and audience are porous at this event, which is more like church than theater. Nyamza decisively shakes hands with a few spectators in the front row. Some patrons look positively stricken by the unexpected congregation in which they find themselves. Others join in with the spirit of the scene, swaying, singing, exclaiming, ululating, and clapping. For some, this opening scene taps deeply held somatic memories, accessing well-inhabited practices of worship in Black churches. For others, this ritual is out of place and out of context in a Johannesburg dance festival. For Nyamza, this scene evokes a weekly ritual from her childhood. As dance critic Adrian Sitchell writes, historically, this context and setting has huge resonance for a Googleated dancer who, as a little girl, had her first classical ballet and contemporary trainings with Zama dance and the late Arlene Westergaard in a Moravian church in her neighborhood. The pews were pushed aside for the classes, but for Nyamza, church was more than a site for makeshift dance classes. Recollections of her childhood are filled with memories of attending church weekly with her grandmother. The charismatic singing, ecstatic worship, mesmerizing dancing, and continuous praise she summons at the start of de-apartheid emulate how she spent Sundays during her childhood and indeed much of her adulthood. But for those who know Mamela Nyamza, the turn to Christian ritual is not without ambivalence. Coming out as a queer woman, divorcing her husband, and claiming a new life as a performance artist who is also a mother, do not find ready convergence with conservative church values. Nyamza has cast off so many of the constraints and expectations of her previous life that a scene of Christian worship is not an obvious beginning for her new performance. A second performer enters, Mpiwe Levy, dressed formally in a black suit and white shirt unbuttoned at the neck. Like Nyamza, he sways and undulates, seemingly possessed by the beat. He follows and surrenders to the rhythm as the arms loosely flow at his sides. He hinges at the waist and slightly crouches over, his knees bending momentarily. Levy then changes direction, rises up, straightens his body as his chest opens up and outward, a single arm jutting up in the air. 1, 2, 1, 2. Eventually, these two dancers converge down stage center, gracefully sliding past each other, possessed by the groove in simultaneity. A few audience members clap along as we hear bells and ringing and leather pillows. The music flows in cascades, a seamless river of movement and song with occasional crescendos, punctuating gestures, a pointed index finger, worship without end. Nyamza and Levy join arms and step together on stage and make their way to the only piece of furniture present, a wooden bench painted in bright rainbow colors. But this is not an ordinary bench. Instead of having the normal 4 legs, it is poised on a triangular base. Nyamza is the first to sit on the bench, carefully placing herself at the center while continuing to thump out the praise music rhythm, her hand slapping the seat. The bench sways and shakes. It's clearly not stable. The man gradually backs up stage, bent over in a worshipful movement until he finally sits next to Nyamza, causing her to shift slightly to the side. Even as they continue to sing and sway while seated, they situate themselves carefully on the bench, attempting to reach equilibrium. The recording fades out. For a brief time, the 2 performers and some audience members continue to hum and clap until the sound fades to silence. This bench is decidedly post-apartheid, painted with a flourish of cheery rainbow colors that evoke both gay pride and the Rainbow Nation. Yet it also references the apartheid past and separate benches for different races. Whether signifying the old apartheid South Africa or the new inclusive one thing is clear. As a bench, it does not work. It is precarious and unstable, constantly threatening to top over, pivoting on a central balance point that causes it to teeter from side to side like a seesaw or to rock from front to back like a boat without a centerboard. In the course of the show, this bench transforms into a pew, a cage, a coffin, a blockade, and a burden. Its cheery colors suggest optimism, but functionally, it seems poised to disappoint and possibly cause harm. Its precarity causes discomfort, and that discomfort and the effort that must be exerted to stay on the bench consume a significant portion of this show, during which Mamela Nyamza and Ampiwe Levy wait and wait and wait, always in silence, sometimes in stillness, sometimes making small adjustments in posture and position, with the bench sometimes tipping one way, then the other, sometimes crowding one person and elevating the other. She clasps her hands. He winces and screws his face up to the side. They both look forward and out. She casts her eyes downward while he looks at a distant horizon. Their stillness is almost unbearable, but it is never dull. Focused and working in tight, coordinated precision, theirs is not a weight of ease or relaxation or lethargy, but rather one of active readiness, its exertions evident in the sweat streaming down their faces and dampening their clothing. Nyamza and Levy focus directly ahead and then begin panning the room, watching. Are they watching the audience? No. It seems more like they are watching imaginary people who are walking and moving, enjoying mobility in a world where these two must wait in stillness. Do they look with envy, resentment, hostility, rage? Their faces are inscrutable, but their intensity is unmistakable. Then suddenly they pop up and down, their arms pumping furiously at their sides. Livy becomes exhausted before Nyamza does and flops down on the bench in repose. Meanwhile, she keeps bouncing up and down, causing the whole bench to rock like a teeter-totter. She lands in the end, and Levy's end of the bench pops up. When she bounces off, Levy and his end of the bench sink to the floor. The bench creaks, the audience laughs, and with the humor of this sound breaking an unbearable tension that has been building throughout, the tension of de-apartheid's fastidious contrast between unproductive stillness and futile exertion. In an unexpected gesture, Levy takes out a handkerchief from his coat and offers it to Nyamza. She delicately dabs the sweat from her face, then hands him back the handkerchief as they both smile. So, they like each other. Even if we don't yet know what their relationship is, they are cordial, respectful, helpful with each other. After a time of waiting, they again begin to stand up, whirl in place, and then sit down again and again. So much effort, so little traction. Then they slide off the bench, turn around, go on their knees, and bow their heads on the bench as if in prayer at a pew. While their heads are down, the bench continues to bob and wiggle like a dinghy in turbulent water. Then the two rise, sit side by side, hands clasped reverently in their laps. Their arms cross at the elbows in a pose of defiance. At one moment, each marks the sign of the cross from head to heart, right shoulder to left shoulder. Church and Christianity are never far from the scene, but one does feel a mounting rage. As the performers in de-apartheid sit and squirm on their unstable seat, the audience grows restless. The patience of Nyamza's dramaturgy gradually forces the audience into a deeper stillness, beyond fidgeting anxiety. And it is in this stillness of the work, its refusal to cater to expectation, that the full impact of this metaphor becomes clear. As the audience and the performers wait in tense expectation, de-apartheid condenses and crystallizes South Africa's suspended revolution, not as an idea, but as an experience. The hope of transition was change, that one could move from here to there, from the bad days of apartheid to the new promised land. The experience of suspended revolution, however, is time-based, requiring endurance with no felt expectation that the tension will resolve. Collapse is both a constant threat and a seemingly likely outcome. What becomes clear in the remainder of the performance are the ways in which Christianity is used to uphold intolerable gender oppression, and how various verses of the Bible have been used to rationalize both slavery and homophobia. At one point, the space of both of them suddenly becomes too confined. Their contest becomes more slapstick, and the audience starts chuckling, and then abruptly, Levy throws Nyamza off the bench onto the floor. Someone in the audience exclaimed, "Whoa." Mamela Nyamza is off the bench, on the floor, on her hands and knees, a position of obedience, vulnerability, and sexual subservience. Levy carefully and precisely removes each of his patent leather shoes and each of Nyamza's high silver pumps, placing all 4 shoes precisely on the floor upstage. And then, after brushing off his pants and his bare feet, he steps onto her back, balancing there in a position of triumph. Both begin speaking contrapuntally. Ephesians 6, verse 5, hallelujah, amen. The rolling incantation between them accelerates and becomes more and more ecstatic and fervent. Their recitation becomes ever more passionate and frenzied, even enraged, and the amens and alleluias cascading in quick succession. Livy stands and then kneels on Nyamza's back for a full 3 excruciating minutes. Finally, she collapses, recoiling into child's pose on the floor, while he pushes down on her back as if doing cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Her repeated amen morphs into a kind of delaminated version of that word. Amen. 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 While Levy recites, oh my God, they face off. Nyamza at one point transforms the bench into a cage and then a coffin as she seems to vanquish and entrap Levy, her oppressor. Nyamza then turns to the audience, inches her snug skirt up around her thighs, crouches down at the edge of the overturned bench, reaches up by her crotch and pulls out a dangling pink ribbon. It is the page marker of a book, the Bible, it turns out. Nyamza quickly, deftly spreads the Bible open across her crotch while simultaneously spreading her legs wide in a grand plie, her fishnet-encased thighs leading to pointed, outstretched feet decisively turned out in ballet's second position. Nyamza stares at the audience fiercely, intensely, her nostrils flaring. She licks her finger with libidinous pleasure and begins thumbing through the Bible's pages, citing phrases that have been used to oppress. Eventually, towards the end of the performance, a deflated Levy is behind her, in retreat, reading the Bible, thoroughly upstaged. In a show that begins by throwing the audience into the deep end of ecstatic Christian worship, religion appears as something that is imbibed and tightly, joyously held in long, entrenched repertoires of the body. The show is not anti-Christian or necessarily about religion or even necessarily about race. De-apartheid is about what is tightly held, ideologies that are imbibed and ingested and internalized, but that may have quite poisonous elements mixed with what is pleasurable, laudable, holy, and sublime. The show is about balance, precarity, equilibrium, about what fails to hold up, what inevitably holds and pushes down. The work delaminates the now, separating component parts from each other, exposing the unbearable and intolerable circumstances that are born with enthusiastic amens. Apartheid deconstructs into separate syllables, de, apart, hate, D is to undo. Apart is distance from the word hate, a delamination of apartheid. The word amen likewise breaks apart, amen. The performance enacts an unraveling and undoing, a process that exposes composite elements of the everyday. In the aftermath of apartheid, in its turbulent wake, Nyamza articulates and performs on stage the potential and potency of the will. She chooses to interrupt habitual motions, her grinding possession in worshipful dance without end, in order to seize hold of that useless rainbow bench, to turn it over, to transform it into a cage, to contain what oppresses her, and to change it yet again as platform and climbing structure on which to enact her defiant and libidinous self-discovery. She does these actions with such ferocity and intensity that the world around her is disrupted and transformed, even if it is not entirely deconstructed and disposed. Nyamza defiantly gyrates on a Bible, yet she still goes on to sing worshipful Christian praises by the performance's end. The old is transformed but not gone. The bench, the Bible, and Levy are all still there. But the bench has been overturned and displaced. The symbolic rainbow has been dismantled from its unstable base and brought down low like a piece of architectural detritus. And Levy's prominence has been thoroughly upstaged by Nyamza's lusty exploitations. She seizes her will and desire, and she wields those powerful forces to overturn her world. Things long held close, a Bible, now produce, at least for Nyamza, different kinds of pleasures and different kinds of revelations. She wields the poisonous remains of colonialism and apartheid, but does not succumb to their corrosiveness. Her will has utterly changed everything. The past remains present, but clearly nothing remains of what once had been. Apartheid's remains are neither dormant nor inert. They are active elements of contemporary life that insert what is unresolved into the present. Apartheid in South Africa has a flourishing afterlife today, as is evident in a lack of substantive redistribution of wealth and land, continued pervasive violence, and extreme material inequality. Although the post-apartheid era was founded on a desire for and commitment to non-racial emancipation, the cloth of the new South Africa has been woven with some of the same fibers that once held apartheid's white supremacy tightly in place. In apartheid's wake, time is out of joint. The performance works of Jay Pother and Mamela Nyamza and others featured in my book manipulate time by stretching, looping, isolating, bifurcating, and accelerating it in extraordinarily interesting ways. Scenarios of conflict endlessly repeat until they finally give way. These performances create a fastidious contrast between unproductive stillness and futile exertion, resisting narrative closure or a utopian notion of arrival or false hopes of cure for apartheid's remaining ailments in the present. These artists dig down into the present, exposing the repressed, isolating and pervasively normalized, disidentifying with cultural elements that paradoxically and problematically may be both beloved and disempowering. They excavate through a kind of forensic autopsy on the psychic and physical afterlives of injustice embedded in the habits of today. Caught in the interminable interval, stuck between an intractable present and an irrecoverable past, between things that are no longer and things that are not yet, Pother and Nyamza deploy strategies that begin to suggest a new way of being without claiming any singular way. Their performances open up spaces for something new to emerge, perhaps something at once blasphemous and libidinous, or something that interrupts an instinctive commitment to playing out old scenarios to their end, because maybe there is no end. Their power resides in the artist's capacity to forge new, emergent aesthetics capable of wielding apartheid's toxic remains without succumbing to their corrosiveness. They craft performance works that often demand a dwelling in the contradictions of the present, a resistance to impulses to simply move on from colonialism or apartheid. At the same time, they operate with an insistent and persistent expectations that things should be otherwise than what they are or have been. Thank you.
we invite you all to submit your questions. In a moment, I'll put a link on the screen for those who are in-house and would like to use a phone or a laptop, or you are welcome to use your pen and pencil. For those who are viewing at home, you can find that link posted on a slide on the YouTube channel. Due to technical limitations, we cannot take any verbal questions from our in-studio audience. I'm sorry for that, but we will be welcoming your questions. You can pass your cards to Kalia or Matthew, who will be in the aisles. We'll take a few minutes now, and then we'll come back in about 5 or 6 minutes to get started.